The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody on this amazing Saturday. I don't know what makes it amazing. The weather here is always good, so nothing special about today. I am at home in Puerto Rico, and this is another episode of the Yaron Brook Show. All right, today we'll jump right into it. I want to talk about economic nationalism, economic patriotism. I guess it all depends on how you want to define it, or you could call the show today the victory of Stephen Bannon. Stephen Bannon, who has been an advocate for economic nationalism for a while, for years and years and years, I think is one. So I want to read you something, and I want you to think about who wrote this, right? So I'm going to read you some stuff, and some of you probably know already, but I'm going to read you, and you tell me who wrote this. All options, I guess, on the table. I am deeply grateful for the opportunities America has given me. But the giant American corporations who control our economy don't seem to feel the same way. They certainly don't act like it. Sure, these companies wave the flag, but they have no loyalty or alliance to America. Levi's is an iconic American brand, but the company operates only 2% of its factories here. Dixon something, maker of the famous No. 2 pencil, has moved almost all of its pencil production to Mexico and China. And General Electric recently shut down an industrial engine factory in Wisconsin and shipped jobs to Canada. The list goes on and on. Again, who wrote this? These American companies show only one real loyalty: to the short-term interests of their shareholders, a third of whom are foreign investors. If they can close up an American factory and ship jobs overseas to save a nickel, that's exactly what they will do, abandoning loyal American workers and hollowing out American cities along the way. Politicians love to say they care about American jobs, but for decades, those same politicians have cited free market principles and refused to intervene in markets on behalf of American workers. And of course, they ignore those same supposed principles and intervene regularly to protect the interests of multinational corporations and international capital. The result: millions of good jobs lost overseas and a generation of stagnant wages, growing inequality, and sluggish economic growth. All right, who wrote it? Now, we've got one vote for Elizabeth Warren. We've got one vote for Ronald Reagan. Let me see if there's anything. Stephen Bannon, Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson did cite this extensively in one of his shows, but he didn't actually write it. I mean, you could imagine Donald Trump saying this, just that it's like 1,000 times better written than anything Donald Trump would actually say. Somebody says Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders could have written this, right? Stephen Bannon, another vote for Stephen Bannon. Stephen Bannon's got two people, right? So we got Stephen Bannon, we got Tucker Carlson. I say it could have been, this happens on a number of themes that Trump is talking about, the hollowing out of our cities and jobs leaving, and how dare a third of shareholders are foreigners and they're making the money. FDR, we got two votes for Elizabeth Warren. Ronald Reagan, somebody says. Oh my God, no. You don't know Reagan if you think he wrote this. No way this is Ronald Reagan. As much as I don't like Ronald Reagan on many issues, this is not Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was like 1,000,000 times better than this. All right, this was written by Elizabeth Warren. And this is a part of Elizabeth Warren's one of her plans, right? Elizabeth Warren, you have to give her credit. Elizabeth Warren is the only politician I know who has taken the time and made the effort to articulate almost every week, every couple of weeks, she puts out a plan. She puts out her vision on a particular issue. And this is called a plan for economic patriotism. Somebody's asking if they can call in. No, you can't call in. But if you want, you can ask a question using the super chat feature on YouTube. So this is Elizabeth Warren. Defend and create American jobs, a plan for economic patriotism. And Elizabeth Warren she just put out a plan on Wall Street and private equity. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think this idea of defending American jobs is a framework for her entire economic policy. And note how she frames this. She frames this as economic patriotism. Now, more than that, Elizabeth Warren, I think, is turning out to be, and I don't know if she'll win the Democratic nomination, although she clearly is one of the leaders in the polls, one of the top 3 candidates right now in the polls, and beating Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Warren is turning out to be a much, much smarter politician than I expected her to be. What Elizabeth Warren has realized is that you're not going to win as a socialist. You cannot run as a democratic socialist in America and win. So she is not a socialist. At least she says she's not a socialist. Right? How does she do that? She does it by declaring herself, or what is she? She declares herself a capitalist. Elizabeth Warren, time and time again, has said, I love capitalism. I am going to save capitalism from itself. I want capitalism. Capitalism is amazing. What capitalism provides is stunning. It just needs to be fixed. It's just being allowed to run amok. We just need better rules around it. Right? But capitalism is truly a good system because it produces wealth. So Elizabeth Warren has defined herself as a capitalist. Now what she's doing with capitalism is what the right has done with capitalism forever. She's using the term capitalism. She's using the generally positive American view of capitalism and presenting a statist, populist, but patriotic economic vision. So you can't really, in terms of the rhetoric, we'll talk about the plans are probably different, but in terms of the rhetoric, she has adopted Donald Trump's rhetoric. She has adopted, it's as if Stephen Bannon is her consultant. She has adopted Stephen Bannon's principles. She's adopted Stephen Bannon's ideas, framing everything in terms of what will make America great again, or what will make capitalism great again. I mean, that could be her campaign slogan. Her campaign slogan could be making capitalism great again. Right? And it's no surprise, therefore, that somebody like Tucker Carlson cannot differentiate between Elizabeth Warren and Donald Trump. And I don't know if you saw the episode of Tucker Carlson endorsing Elizabeth Warren's plans, endorsing Elizabeth Warren's program, and indeed reading much of what I just read to you. He read on a show favorably. He said, yes, this is what we need. What we're seeing in America today is an abandonment of principle, an abandonment of ideology in the name of economic populism, in the name of economic nationalism, economic patriotism. What we're seeing is, in the name of power, in the name of a massive power grab by Washington, D.C., in the name of pragmatism, the right is no longer ideological. The left is no longer ideological. What they are now is just out for power, do whatever it takes to get the power. It's naked now. They will use whatever language to, motivate the troops, to get people aligned, all in the name of saving the middle class. That's Elizabeth Warren. She keeps repeating, what we need is the middle class. She riles against trade. So those of you who think the Democrats are globalists, all you have to do is read Elizabeth Warren here. She talks about the massive loss of jobs because of bad trade deals, basically mimicking Donald Trump, but from the left. She talks about the fact that government has worked for the elites, the fact that government has worked for Wall Street, the fact that government has made some people rich at the expense of whom? The expense of working class Americans. Putting American workers and middle class prosperity ahead of multinational profits and Wall Street bonuses. That's Elizabeth Warren. That could be Donald Trump. That could be Steve Bannon. So what we're seeing today is a unification of left and right. What we're seeing today is a unification of left and right around economic policy. There is no debate anymore. There is no argument anymore about what economic policy should be in the United States. There is no opposition to the statist economic policies advocated for years and years and years by the left anymore. The only debate between left and right in America today is over social issues. It's over abortion, it's over race, it's over gender, it's over issues like that. But over economic issues, basically, whoever stood for free markets, whoever stood for individual liberty in the realm of economics has completely and utterly buckled and lost. There is no political party today. There are no spokesman for the idea of economic liberty on either side of the political map. Right? And that is, unbelievably tragic. And it's exactly what Ayn Rand predicted. It's exactly what Ayn Rand predicted 50 years ago, 60 years ago. That the conservatives could not defend capitalism. The conservatives could not defend free markets. And as a consequence, there would be no voice for free markets in mainstream American politics. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So what is Elizabeth Warren advocating for? Well, she's advocating for redoing all the tax agreements. She's advocating for penalizing companies that move overseas. She's advocating for getting government to create basically what she calls a Department of Economic Development that would create, she says, a program to bring jobs back to America. The new department will have a single goal, she says, creating and defending good American jobs. Again, what's the difference between her and Donald Trump? None. One of her proposals, again, completely mirrors what Donald Trump has said. She argues for more actively managing our currency value to promote exports and domestic manufacturing. In other words, let's lower the value of the dollar so it's cheaper for foreigners to buy American goods and more expensive for Americans to buy foreign goods, and therefore reduce the trade deficit by manipulating the currency. And at the same time, by the way, let's accuse the Chinese of currency manipulation. So she wants to become a currency manipulator. Again, Donald Trump has said exactly the same thing. She wants to leverage federal research and development to create domestic jobs and sustain investments in the future. She wants basically for the American taxpayer to get stock in exchange for R&D that private companies use that was, funded by taxpayer dollars. She wants, as Mauricio says, she wants fascism, but so does the right. They all want fascism. She said taxpayers should be able to capture the upside of their research investment. Taxpayers didn't make these investments. Bureaucrats make the investment. Maybe, how do we count for all the lost investments the taxpayers made? How do we count for all the money that the government wastes on basic research that is useless and futile and never gets use for anything? I mean, that's just one. So she says taxpayers get an equity stake in any company that relies on intellectual property these investments create. They retain royalties on publicly funded innovations or golden share of the patent revenue, or require the companies benefiting from publicly funded R&D to reinvest profits back into domestic production, and so on and so forth. Now again, I don't think this is something anybody on the right would object to. There is no voice, for example, no voice on the American political landscape today arguing for the elimination of publicly funded research and development, of publicly funded science. There's no voice in the American landscape today, right or left, arguing for the privatization of basic research. So the progressive agenda today in economics is the Trump agenda today in economics. The progressive agenda today in economics is the Conservative Nationalist agenda in economics. It's exactly the same thing. By the way, all R&D investment, according to Juan, should be spread across every region of the country. This is the populism. Not focused on only a few coastal cities. God forbid we invest too much money in Boston or in Silicon Valley. We need research and development dollars in Ohio and Indiana, in Arkansas, and Mississippi, and Alabama. Because we know there's all this scientific talent over there that is just, if only we gave them the money. If only we gave them the money. All right, and she says, look, we need to start investing in our companies. We need to promote export. And China spends a fortune promoting its export companies. We only spend about $200 million through the Export-Import Bank. You remember the Export-Import Bank, that bank that is run by the government that benefits a few American corporations that Republicans over and over again said they would eliminate? They almost eliminated it in one of the budgets. It was basically reduced to, its budget was taken away from it. And then the Republicans caved and brought it right back. So Elizabeth Warren wants us to dramatically increase, what the import-export banks, and do 100 times more, billions of dollars, because that's what the Chinese do. So we should mimic China. We should have a managed economy, supposedly managed economy like China. I wonder if she also advocates reducing regulations to Chinese levels. We should deploy the massive purchasing power of the federal government to create markets for American-made products. So the government should buy made in America only. But I guess maybe it should buy more than it needs, because ultimately it's got all this money lying around. It can print money. The government can print money. And deficits don't matter. There's agreement, by the way, on the left and the right. The deficits don't matter. Modern monetary theory says deficits don't matter. You can just print yourself as much money as you want. Rush Limbaugh, over the last few days, said, oh, all that stuff about deficit hawks, that was just us playing politics during the Obama administration. We don't believe in that stuff anymore. Deficits don't matter. So left and right, giving up on the deficits. Deficits don't matter. and on and on. We need apprenticeship programs. We need to spend $20 billion annually on apprenticeship programs. And of course, we need again to mimic our international competitors. They promote their domestic industries. We don't. We don't. We need to stop this unfairness, this globalist unfairness. Now, she proposes, these other countries, one of the things she really, really, really envies these other countries, they all have these great 5-year plans. 5-year plans they have. And it's great because they have policy and they have vision and they think long term and they develop these 5-year plans and to protect their own industries. And this is amazing. I mean, Japan has it and Germany has it and China has it. What we need, she says, we need a 4-year plan. I don't know why a 4-year plan. I don't know why a 5-year plan. Maybe she realizes that 5-year plans are still associated with the Soviet Union, and we still think badly about 5-year plans. She wants a 4-year plan that's focused on a national job strategy, just like they have in Germany and China, because Germany and China are so much richer than we are. They produce so much more than we do. Where does this come from? Anyway, that is Warren's plan for economic patriotism. Now, again, if you've read a little bit of Steve Bannon, you would recognize a lot of this in Steve Bannon. And over last weekend, there was a conference, first of its kind, first ever conference, for what are now called, and I talked about this when I talked about the conservative civil war, what are now called the national conservatism or conservative nationalism or nationalist conservatives or however you want to call it. And it was launched at the Ritz-Carlton in Washington, D.C., and it had all the big-time conservative thinkers in quotes, I would say. There was the former founder of the American Enterprise Institute that used to be kind of pro-free market. John Bolton from the Trump administration. Of course, Tucker Carlson was there. The guy who organized the conference was an Israeli intellectual. These Israelis everywhere. Israeli intellectual, Yoram Hazony, who has got a book. And Ilan Jonah from the Ayn Rand Institute just wrote a critique of this book. In defense of nationalism is his book. It's a book about all the beauty of nationalism. Anyway, they held this conference, and the key was that there was one rallying call that conservatives, this new conservative movement needs to rally around, and that is no more worshiping at the altar of free markets at the expense of the middle class. Now, this makes me laugh for a number of reasons. I don't remember any conservatives worshiping at any altar other than the Christian altar, other than the pragmatist altar, other than the power-lusting altar, but at the altar of free markets? Name me a conservative. Name me a conservative who is a real promoter of free markets. Fully and consistently. But even that mild defense of free markets the conservatives engaged in is too much for this new breed of conservatives. Tucker Carlson, of course, was their media representative. Of course, that's one rallying cry. The other one is no more endless wars dedicated to slaying perceived monsters overseas. Perceived. Osama bin Laden, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, only perceived monsters. No more shame about saluting the flag, defending borders, and demanding assimilation. So, abandon free markets, rile up the nationalism, build a wall, worship the flag, and stop intervening in wars overseas. But crucially, forget about this free market stuff. We have to defend American American, capital A, big letters, American interests, whatever those are. We have to save American jobs. We have to bring manufacturing back to America. Yeah. I mean, this is where they are. From the talk show radio host, Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, Tucker Carlson. They are anti-markets, anti-founding fathers, anti-individual rights, anti-individual liberty. They are anti-everything that at least some conservatives in the past believed in, or at least said they believed in, even though they couldn't defend it. They are the negation of America. They are the stabbing in the back of everything that is America. They are no different than Elizabeth Warren and AOC. They are un-American. And they're idiots on top of that, because they have no basis for these arguments. They have no basis for these arguments. And they don't understand economics. And of course, they're nativists. They're real nativists. Thank you. It was getting hot. I'm thanking somebody for reminding me to take my headphones off. So, I want to talk a little bit about, we've talked about the economics, but if you think about tariffs, Elizabeth Warren believes in tariffs. She says so in her economic patriotism thing. These new conservative nationalists believe in tariffs. Elizabeth Warren wants to promote manufacturing jobs in the United States and economic, promote companies that produce in America. So do the economic nationalists. Elizabeth Warren wants to do everything she can to help the so-called middle class. So did the economic nationalists. I mean, as I said, no more worshiping at the altar of the free market at the expense of the middle class. The GOP today, or these nationalists at least, are using the tax code to favor their kind of businesses at the expense of others. They're using tariffs, which is a tax, to protect some businesses at the expense of others. And of course, they're massively, all of them across the entire board, are using regulations to attack business, profit, Wall Street, finance, anything that they deem as globalist, internationalist, as not consistent with their vision, the narrow vision of what America should look like. And of course, it's much worse than that. Because it's not just that the national conservatives, the conservative nationalists, are just anti-capitalism. And by the way, I will get to your super chat questions. I'm actually going to copy them so I don't lose them in the stream. But it's not just that they hold these bad economic ideas. But they hold these bad economic ideas in the context of nationalism, in the context of a much broader agenda, which is just as dangerous, which is the nativist agenda. The agenda that is focused on American values, which are not American values, which are focused on immigration, what they call assimilation, but they don't really believe in assimilation. But in the social issues, what they call today the social issues. And this is where there is conflict between the left and the right. Some conflict. Both oppose immigration for economic reasons. I've told you many times before that Bernie Sanders is anti-immigration, Elizabeth Warren is anti-immigration because it lowers wages. So they are anti-immigration for economic reasons. And both parties agree on that. The real, difference between them is their approach to issues surrounding race. And it's hard for me to say this because I don't want to sound hysterical and I don't want to sound like I'm, just lost it. But the fact is that these conservative nationalists are promoting a racist ideology. They deny it. Half the conference was them saying we're not racists. But they're also saying we need to skew immigration towards Europeans. We need not job-based, not skill-based, but race-based, or what they would say culture-based, because we know that people are 100% determined by their culture. This is the danger, as I said yesterday, with evolutionary psychology and this idea that one is determined, one has no free will. You are a product of where you came from. That's what's fundamentally racist about Donald Trump's tweets. He says you are a product of where you came from. That's the first sentence in that first tweet. You can find it and you can see it. So here's what a University of Pennsylvania law professor, Amy Wax, said on a panel on immigration. And Amy Wax is a well-known conservative and certainly a member of this conservative nationalism. She said immigrants are too loud and they're responsible for an increase in litter. She explicitly advocated for an immigration policy that would favor immigrants from Western countries over non-Western ones. The position, she put it, that our country will be better off with more whites and fewer non-whites. Now, I don't know how you get more explicit than that. Our country will be better off with more whites than fewer non-whites. So while the conference organizers made a concerted effort not to invite any so-called alt-right people, and a number of alt-rights were kicked out, and of course the organizers, because both the organizers I think are Jewish, they were later, the alt-right attacked them with all kinds of anti-Semitic labels in order to go after them for being banned from this conference. They didn't need to be there. Because the fact is that the national conservative, or these conservative nationalists, are moving in the direction of the alt-right to the point where soon we won't be able to take the difference. Now, in this sense, the right has become as tribalist as the left. So the left wants identity politics. The left identifies and argues identity politics. Elizabeth Warren used the fact that she was so-called Native American, of course she wasn't, in order to get a job. They love their identity politics. It's all about identity politics. The lefts are racists. And the way the right combats that is by being racist. The way the right combats the tribalism of the left is by being tribal. The way the left combats the economic fascism of the left is by being economic fascist. The left always wins in America in the long run because the left is intellectual. The left is more consistent. The left dominates our educational institutions. And all that happens is the right becomes the left. And here the right is becoming the left. All of you who claim, well, the Nazis are not the right, the Nazis are the left. Yeah, that's right. In a sense, they're all the same. Now, I think there are differences, and I think it's worth holding the right and the left as different. I think that there's a difference between fascism and socialism. They're all the same in the end. They're all authoritarian, collectivistic slaughterhouses. But it's useful to see those trends on the right and to see those trends on the left and to see them converging and to see how the left is ultimately dictating the terms of debate. There are a few voices out there on the right. I don't know, some neocons, some leftover neocons, what's his name, George Will, a few others, who are arguing against this national conservatism or conservative nationalism. I prefer conservative nationalism. But that's it. The only other big difference between conservative nationalism and the left is the religion they advocate. Conservative nationalism truly believes that America must be a Christian nation. So, as part of their big time agenda and in part of their bucking whatever, quote, libertarian trends there have been in the Republican Party, they are advocating for using the power of the state to address problems like the opioid crisis, which is largely caused by the state, the use of pornography by teenagers, so they want to ban pornography, certainly by teens. I don't know how you do that. The overwhelming influence of Silicon Valley in our economy, they want to break up Silicon Valley. So they want to use a Christian set of ethics. Of course, they want to ban abortion. They want to do all the classic things that conservatives have always wanted. Now, above all else, they say, so that's their religion. Their religion is very much theology. Their religion is very much Christianity. And that's what they want to impose on all of us. And again, if you read Stephen Bannon, it's straight out of Stephen Bannon. Stephen Bannon has taken over the Republican Party. I mean, it's true that Trump kicked him out early, but Stephen Bannon has dominated the Trump presidency and is now the most influential person, not directly, I guess, but indirectly on the Republican Party. What is the religion of the left? Well, maybe it's environmentalism. Or maybe the left doesn't have a religion, and that's the difference. Some of the left is just nihilistic. Now, I don't believe a lot of these intellectuals on the right are actually religious. Again, I think religion is just a way for them to achieve what their ultimate goal is. And listen to this. This is their ultimate goal, they said at this conference. What they want to do is promote national social cohesion. They want to overcome social and political polarization and rebuild a sense of shared community and national destiny. They argue that the problem with liberalism not in the leftist sense, but liberalism in the historical sense, the classical liberal sense, the problem with liberalism is individualism. The problem with America has been too much individualism, too individualistic. What we need is more collectivism, more community, more national destiny. That, by the way, they took from the neocons. National destiny and shared community is something neocons always had, but neocons viewed our achieving national destiny by taking over the world or by bringing democracy to the world. These people want national destiny and social cohesion, a shared community, by using government to impose its will on our thinking. Yeah, Dan says it's straight out of neocon thinking. It is. They've taken elements of the neocons, and of course many of them are former neocons. They've taken elements of neocons, but they apply it to a different set of problems. They apply it to the middle class. They apply it to the working class. And how do we create national cohesion about some national project? Right? They want, and this is straight out of Elizabeth Warren, they want to embrace a vision of, quote, the nation that assists people where they are. God forbid you get in that car and drive to where the jobs are. We're going to bring the jobs to you, just like Elizabeth Warren said. We're going to do R&D everywhere. There are so many parallels between what these people are talking about, what she is talking about. On the economic front, it is stunning. And of course, on the collectivistic front, on the nationalism side, she just chooses to call it patriotism because nationalism is a term associated with the right. So she's embraced patriotism. But there's no difference. Their visions are the same. They say the nation is just a community of communities. And we must build trust among these communities. How? With the government imposing its will on all of us, on dictating our morality and on dictating our economics. Which plants go where, who manufactures what and where, and what do our kids see on the internet. That is the job of government. Now, look, this has always been in the background of the right. This has always been there. But it is so much more explicit. It is so much more explicit. And the similarities between left and right are so much more evident today. And as the left has become more leftist, moved further out to the left, the right just follows them right there. The right just, the left and right are fighting over power over our lives, over power, how to dictate our lives, how to control and manipulate our lives. That's it. The differences are negligible, are insignificant when it comes to these kind of policies. Now, it's true. On the right, there's more opposition to this. Or at least in the Republican Party, there's still a few remnants of pro-free market people, at least some free market, that are resisting some of these economic policies. How long do they have? How long will they survive? How long will they be successful if America embraces these views? Not very long. In the long run, we are doomed, and it doesn't matter who wins, left or right. I know some of you would rather live under Nazi Germany than than the Soviet Union. I don't want either one of them, and I view them as equal evils. Some of you would rather live under a Christian theocracy than under leftist socialist rule. I don't want either one of them. I think we should fight both of them to the death. Give me liberty or give me death is real. It's a slogan nobody understands. Certainly not any of these people we're quoting. But it means something. It means something. And what we face today is not death. And you've already caved. So many of you have already caved. You've already given in. Oh, the left is so bad. I'm going to embrace these wonderful people on the right because they at least love America. They don't have a clue what America is. Oh, people like Ken on the chat think they know something about fighting and think they know something about guns and think they know something about what it's like to be in the line of fire. They have no clue. They are armchair nationalists who think they're going to go out there and use their guns to fight the left. They are pathetic. And they will be the first ones to cower and run for the hills. Run for the hills. Right? I mean, do they really know what revolution is like? No. They don't have a clue. People who advocate for revolution, people are usually people in the armchairs. Yeah, they go out to the firing range and they know how to shoot at a blank target. But really? Really? You think there's going to be a revolution in this country and that there's going to be any kind of positive outcome of such a revolution? Run, run, run. Run for the hills. That's where you're going. Oh, my God. Okay, let's take a few questions. Corporate research with well-defined goals is more productive than academic research. In computer graphics, there was an explosion of progress when movie effects and computer games took over. Well, of course, corporate research is always better, and indeed in the past, there was very little government-funded research, if any, in the 19th century. All the progress we made in the 19th century was progress that was made in corporate laboratories or in private laboratories. Laboratories like Bell Labs, laboratories like Thomas Edison's laboratory. There was no government funding of that. Now, in the past, I'm not sure, it's quite true that government has always had some funding of universities, but many universities were truly private in the past. And a lot of amazing private research was done there. Now, what the left would argue, what many argue, is that even the graphic stuff, right, is all based on much more basic science and research that is done in academia. And that's true. The kind of basic science and basic research is not typically done, certainly not today. It used to be done in the days of Bell Lab, but certainly not today in corporate labs. Because why would they? When it's done, in a sense, for free in academia. Now, that's because government has basically crowded out private investment and this is a well-known economic phenomenon of crowding out. The government spends money on a certain product, private industry stops spending money on that product because they can't compete. The cost of funds for the government is zero, and the cost to corporations, there's a real cost. So the basic research today is all funded by government. But that's a perversion and distortion, and the idea that there would be no basic research if there was no government funding is just a lie. It's just untrue. So in a free market, corporations and private individuals would love to fund basic research. They'd enjoy it, they'd have fun. They might be able to sign some deals with the universities where they got a certain percentage of the royalties that come out the other side of that basic research. Indeed, smart universities like Stanford is the world leader in this, are very good at licensing the technology out. So when a startup uses a technology developed at Stanford, they pay Stanford a licensing fee, or they give Stanford a percentage of the company. If all universities were private, if government stepped out of funding the universities, then universities would be free to cut such deals with private businesses. But, and it would be so much more effective and so much more productive if all this was privately funded. Think about the politics that enter into government funding. The corruption, the ideological nature of it, whether it's stem cells or whether it's climate change or whether it's 1,000 other things that are motivated by politics that determine whether some things get, or whether it's the kind of cancers that get researched. Some cancers have more focus than other cancers. Not necessarily based on mortality, but much more on kind of what is more in the news. Heart disease kills more people than cancer, and yet there's much more funding going into cancer than heart disease, because cancer is much more emotional. Heart disease, you tend to suffer less. So I think government funding of science is corrupt, it's inefficient, and the only thing that makes that provides value out of it is the fact that there are really competent, able scientists at universities that are doing great research that happens to be funded by the government because that's the only source of funding that there is. Only source of funding that there is. All right, let's see, what's the next question? Is it possible to predict at what level national debt becomes crippling? I mean, maybe, but I don't know what it is, and I haven't seen anybody else be able to do it. And indeed, it's very dependent on circumstances. And what does one mean by crippling? I would argue that national debt, both in Japan and now in the United States, has caused the economy to grow a lot slower than it otherwise would. Dramatically slower. How do you measure that? How do you figure that out? Well, you'd have to understand economics and understand how capital is used to know that. But there's no parallel universe in which an America that doesn't have the debt is running and has much better economic growth that I can point to and prove, if that's the kind of proof you want. But economic theory would suggest it, and the periods in which the U.S. economy grew dramatically were periods of relatively low debt, or where debt was actually declining. Like after World War II, debt was being paid off. And the economy did pretty well. In the 19th century, there was almost no government debt. In the 20s, there was almost no government debt. Those are periods of very high economic growth. Very high economic growth. So I don't know, and I don't know what crippling. I suspect that we're much more likely to enter a period of just slow, meandering, insignificant economic growth, and we ought to see a massive collapse that we can blame on the debt. The one thing that modern monetary theorists get right is that America will now go bankrupt because it has a printing press. If you have a printing press, you cannot go bankrupt. Somebody asked, do you think Ronald Reagan could get elected now? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I posted on my Facebook page a speech Ronald Reagan made. The last speech he made when he was president, this is after the elections in 1988, I guess. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful speech about immigration and the value of immigration and the importance of immigration. No candidate, left or right, could win today making a speech like that. No candidate, left or right, could win making a speech like that. I mean, it was really one of the best speeches I've heard Ronald Reagan made, and he read it, and you can tell he's old, and he's losing it a little bit. But wow, I mean, the attitude, the optimism, the positivism, this perspective of America is great and can be great, but it's great for the right reasons. It's great because of individualism. It's great because of freedom. It's great because of the Founding Fathers. It's great because it has this great culture and immigrants that come in, assimilate, and they become part of that culture. And no, I mean, Donald Trump has the exact opposite sense of life, the exact opposite view of America than Ronald Reagan. And as do the left. So left and right are unified in their antagonism to a Ronald Reagan view of the world. And I'm a huge critic of Ronald Reagan, and Ayn Rand didn't vote for Ronald Reagan because Ronald Reagan basically, in order to win, made a deal with the devil, and the devil was the religious right, and I think we're suffering to this day from that deal. I think everything that's happening in America today on the right is a consequence of the rise, legitimization, the political power that the religious right got in the post-Ronald Reagan Republican Party. Trump's favorite president is Reagan only to the extent that he has no clue what Reagan said and has no clue what Reagan represents. He hated Reagan at the time. He lambasted the Japanese. He lambasted Reagan's trade policies. He lambasted Reagan's immigration policies at the time. So the idea that Trump loves Reagan is absurd. He has no clue who Reagan was. And he hated him in the 80s. And his policies are the exact opposite of the 80s. But what we're suffering today is not that part of the Reagan legacy. Because economically and in many other respects, Reagan did some good things, not as many. But he gave great speeches. And he changed people's attitudes towards America. He inspired positivism and optimism and entrepreneurship and just a gung-ho. He kind of reinvigorated the American spirit and the American sense of life with his speeches. And nobody makes speeches like Ronald Reagan does in the Republican Party. And again, if somebody did, they would lose, big time. And that's why nobody makes the speeches. Now again, his sin, and it's a big one, is, but he probably couldn't have won otherwise, is the fact that he entrenched the religionists within the Republican Party. All right. What do you think about Rand Paul's opposing 9/11 spending? This is a 9/11 fund, I guess, for some of the victims of 9/11, the police and the firefighters. I mean, I actually haven't followed this story very closely, but let me just say this. Of all the things Paul should be standing up against, why this? I mean, there's a million things. The government is spending so much money. The deficit is out of control. Government spending is out of control. Everything about what the government is doing is out of control. And this is what he chooses to make a grandstand on. I just don't get it. and I don't understand it, and I haven't followed it enough to understand it. So, no, I mean, filibuster the budget. I'd have a respect for that. Vote against Trump's budget, which sometimes in the past he's done. But in Trump's budget, I don't think he would. I think he sold his soul. I think Rand Paul has completely and utterly sold his soul to Trump, which is sad. Can a Lincoln of individualism come about? Yeah, but will anybody vote for them? The problem is not political leadership. The problem is not Elizabeth Warren versus Donald Trump. Elizabeth Warren and Donald Trump are giving the people what they want. And part of the problem with Elizabeth Warren and Donald Trump is they're going to be fighting over the same people. Working class, mid-America. On the economic issues, there's going to be very little difference between the two of them. They're going to be appealing to the same populist population. The question is does America want individualism? Do the American people still adhere to the values of the founding fathers? Do American people still respect America? If American people heard the message of a Lincoln or the message of a Jefferson or the message of a Hamilton or the message even of a Reagan, would they respond positively? And this is where I'm afraid. And I'm pessimistic. And I've never been afraid or pessimistic in America. I don't think they would. I think it's over. I think unless something dramatic changes in terms of our ability to educate and get the word out, unless I and people like me start having millions of followers on YouTube, and there's no indication of that, I don't see how somebody in politics can be successful. We're still in desperate need of education. We're still in desperate need of changing the mindset of Americans. Changing their attitude. And until we do that, I just don't see how a good politician can get elected. In Yugoslavia, we had the slogan, others' stuff we don't want. Our stuff we won't give. You're right about the extreme tribalism in the Balkans. Balkans remains a pejorative to this day. That's right. But that tribalism you have exported to the world. And what is fascinating is that Ayn Rand saw this in the 60s. She wrote a whole talk, you can find it online, on balkanization, on global balkanization, and how this attitude of tribalism, this attitude, I'm willing to suffer just so I don't have to deal with you because you're different than me. That attitude is now the dominant, she viewed it as becoming the dominant attitude in the 60s, and here we are today, and it is. She was, again, right. When I read Global Balkanization, which I encourage all of you to read, it's in Capitalism, An Unknown Ideal, it's stunning, the extent to which it describes today. Somebody young looking for freedom opportunity, would you still advise to try to emigrate to America or what other place? I still advise coming to America because I don't know of a better place. But don't expect too much. And if you're just looking for economic opportunities, then there are lots of economic opportunities. Ireland, Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand, are all places that have economic opportunities that in some ways equal or surpass the United States. And I know people who've moved to Singapore, Americans who love Singapore. I just met them when I was in Singapore. People who like South Korea, although South Korea is turning dramatically to the left. When you understand the objectivist principles, there's just no way to ignore the reality of what's going on around us. And there's no way to to not diagnose this culture the way it is, not the way you want it to be, not the way you wish it would be, but the way it is. Somebody mentioned Leonard Peikoff's Fort Hope Farms from the 80s and 90s. I mean, he tells it like it is, and he's right. And we're suffering the consequences of the fact that nobody took him seriously back then. And the culture continued to deteriorate from then to now. And today it's worse. Today it's worse than it was back then. So, come to America, join the fight. We're fighting to make America free again, make America truly great again. So join us. The battle, I think, is still going to be won or lost here. I just don't see anywhere else where it can be. This is where the intellectual battle for the soul of civilization is being held right now. And we need all the help we can get, because a lot of people who we thought were allies turned out to have defected and run for the hills as soon as it became hard, as soon as there was a seemingly more emotional solution out there. Okay, I think this will be the last question. Given the expansion drift of the EU and the continuous move to take away rights from its citizens, is it more of a threat to freedom and peace than aid? I'm not sure. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a real challenge. So, the EU, yes, on the one hand, it is violating rights left and right. It continues to grow. It continues to violate rights. It continues to intervene. But if the EU went away and all these countries got national governments, was those national governments abandon all the ways in which the EU is violating individual rights? I don't think so. I think the EU is doing what national governments would do if the EU didn't exist. So I don't think that the world is a better place without the EU, because I think that Europe would embrace the same policies even without the EU, and some that are worse. And as I said yesterday, the temptation would be, and the inclination would be, out of the EU, once the EU is gone, is for the old nationalist, tribalist tendencies to get worse in Europe, and for there to be another war in Europe. I mean, with all the problems of the EU, it has prevented war, and it has facilitated trade, movement of people, movement of capital, which I think is all wonderful. I guess my point, and I think I'll end with this. Point is a broader point. There are no gimmicks that are going to save us. Brexit will not save Great Britain. Leaving the EU will not save any particular country. Doing away with the EU will not bring about capitalist heaven. Voting for Donald Trump will not save us. Not voting for Donald Trump will not save us. There are no shortcuts. Changing the world, and the world desperately needs changing, and it needs changing more now than ever, and it's more urgent than ever, particularly in America. Europe has always been screwed up. People forget, but not that long ago there was a Soviet Union that occupied a big chunk of the world. So in many regards, the rest of the world is in much better shape than it is today than it ever has been. But in America, things are getting worse in ways that I could have never predicted. And there's no shortcuts in saving it. There's no shortcuts in changing it. It's going to be hard work. It means fighting the fight. It means sticking to our principles. I did this event with Greg Salamiri and Ankar Gate with Dave Rubin, talking about free speech and regulating the internet. And Dave said something like, I don't know, I like this idea of sticking to principles, but, look, I'm being screwed. They're violating my ability to earn a living. They're accusing me of being all these things. The media is all against me. I don't think I want to stick to principles. And what I said, and I say this now with regard to Trump and all of this stuff that's going on? If not now, when? If you're not going to stick to your principles when they're being challenged, what point is having principles? If you're only going to stick to your principles when it's easy, what's the point of having principles? It's like free speech. If you have free speech only when you say nice things to one another, then you don't need a First Amendment. The First Amendment is there to protect you when people are saying not so nice things, when you are saying controversial things, when you're criticizing authority, when you're criticizing the common wisdom. Principles serve the same function. On a day-to-day basis, yeah, you need them, but they're really important when there's a temptation to violate them. They're really important when lying seems like it might be a good idea. Oh, I've got a principle. By the way, Ken, I don't believe in the principle of non-aggression, so I don't know where that comes from. Principles are there exactly for these kind of points in time. And I can show you why you are better off by sticking to the principle. It's not that principles are a form of sacrifice, which is what's implied by Ken's comment. Ken says, if somebody's at my door to kill me, I won't tell them I believe in the principle of non-aggression. So as I said, I don't believe in the principle of non-aggression. So that's easy. If somebody's there to kill me, I kill them first. I fear Ken runs for the hills. But if somebody's trying to take away my livelihood, I fight for that livelihood. But I don't violate their rights if they're not violating mine. And they don't owe me a livelihood. YouTube doesn't owe me a livelihood, and that's a whole separate conversation. But the point is, that's when you stick to principles. Yeah, Donald Trump comes and he's fighting the left with you. Oh, we got to kill the left. But what about your principles? What about his ideas? What about what he represents? There are no shortcuts. Saving America will not be done through politics. Saving America will not be done through nationalism. Saving America will not be done by statism. Through statism. Saving America will not be done by scapegoating immigrants, foreigners, foreign countries, trade, capitalism. Saving America can only happen if we embrace, stick to, and fight ruthlessly, unapologetically for what's true, for what's just, for what's right, for the system where all men are equal before the law, equal in rights, equal in liberty, where all men have an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is what we fight for. Give me liberty or give me death wasn't an empty slogan. And right now, death is not the option you face. It's just being a little unpopular. It's just standing up to power. It's just standing up to authority. It's just standing up to demagogues. Show some balls, show some guts. You want a civil war? Guns? This is much harder. This is where real courage is required. Real courage is required not in shooting a gun, but in standing up to the majority, and standing up to people in power, to standing up to ideas that tempt the heart, but must be rejected by the mind. The ideas don't even tempt my heart, but they tempt some people's hearts. So, join me, fight. You can support the Yaron Brook Show, one of the voices out there fighting. You can support the Yaron Brook Show on yaronbrookshow.com/support or on subscribestar.com/Yaron Brook Show. I will be back tomorrow. I'll try to do a more positive spin tomorrow, something more positive. We'll talk about some good stuff. I've got a bunch of other stories here. I had about Elizabeth Warren, her attack on finance, all that. We'll use those in future shows. I have a feeling Elizabeth Warren is going to be around for a while, and we're going to have lots of opportunities to attack her. Next show is tomorrow, Sunday, at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. 3 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm going to talk about Michelangelo, Florence, a little bit about aesthetics, a little bit about Ottoman. We'll see if I get as many people watching as I do today. I hope so, because it's more important. Because as I said somewhere, politics, while we can fight, are not in your control. The kind of world you create in your space, the kind of world you create inside here, inside your head, inside your mind, and the kind of world you create around you is in your power. Embrace it. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.